Smith podcast.
It is remarkable, said Dr. Manners, how the scope of our pharmacopoeia has been widened by interplanetary exploration. In the past 30 years, hundreds of hitherto unknown substances, employable as drugs or medical agents, have been found in the other worlds of our own system. It will be interesting to see what the Alan Farquar expedition will bring back from the planets of Alpha Centauri when, or if, it succeeds in reaching them and returning to Earth. I doubt, though, if anything more valuable than selenine will be discovered. Selenine, derived from a fossil lichen found by the first rocket expedition to the Moon in 1975, has, as you know, practically wiped out the old-time curse of cancer. In solution, it forms the base of an infallible serum, equally useful for cure or prevention. I fear I haven't kept up on a lot of the new discoveries, said Rupert Balkoff, the sculptor and Manners' guest, a little apologetically. Of course, everyone has heard of selenine, and I've seen frequent mention, recently, of a mineral water from Ganymede whose effects are like those of the mythical fountain of youth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 20 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was Shelley de Cruz reading the opening of today's story. I am one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yeah, we're back into science fiction territory this week, aren't we? We're looking at the Plutonian Drug.
Yes, it's, I suppose it's modern in terms of its post-Smith's own age, isn't it? We're somewhere in the future in Smithian terms. It feels like we're more in pretty much our time, doesn't it?
Well, there is a date mentioned in it, which is 1996. But that was when it was found, so it was a few years before. So I'm putting it sort of like, mid-2000s, something like that.
Yeah, that's the impression I was getting, yeah. And it's interesting to see how, well, certainly in one day, I don't think it was that far out with the moon landing, to be honest.
No, and also, well, plutonium.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to get onto that. There's a little bit of grim history surrounding that. But
isn't there?
And this is, well, as the name totally implies, this is very much a drug story, right?
Yes, indeed, yeah. So, yeah, we'll be discussing that later.
Strap yourselves in for the trip ahead. In fact, there's not just one drug mentioned here. We get a whole solar system of drugs, don't we?
Oh, we do, yeah, but and earthly ones as well. Because we've got hashish and cannabis and all kinds of uppers, downers. You know, a whole smorgasbord. It's like going to a rave in 1992.
Like a Cheech and Chong movie.
Yeah.
So, shall we start with our favourite words? I thought because this was a modern setting and a modern story, the language was a little more toned down, a little less baroque.
Yes.
But nonetheless, I did get a few words out of this.
Yeah, I got a couple, not that many, but I did get a couple. The first one I'm going to go with is eloignment, which is an archaic term for removing oneself or one's property to a faraway location.
Yes, I was totally unfamiliar with that word, I have to say. And we'll see, of course, how that makes sense a little bit later on. I first chose syncope or syncope, which I think we've probably mentioned before, but I had to look it up again. Fainting, basically, passing out.
Yeah, I think I chose that way back in season 1 somewhere, because that was new to me then. I've since used it in several stories.
Very nice, very nice.
Next one I'm going to go with is discorporate, which is quite, it's one of those words, but I don't think I've ever really known the full meaning of it. You can get the gist of it, but it's deprived of corporation or not part of a corporation. So yeah, like these little businesses, they're discorporate. They're not part of an umbrella kind of thing.
Right. My next choice is decrescent, which means waning, usually applied to the moon, of course.
Next for me is colloid, which is a mixture of insoluble particles dispersed in another medium, so sort of suspended in something like milk or gelatin.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's when you see those little, you see pictures of it, like gelatin with those little particles like suspended in it.
Yeah.
And things like that. Yeah, that's a colloid, apparently.
My next one is a word that, well, the meaning was fairly obvious just from the way the word is constructed, but I'd not heard it before. Petrific. So obviously petrifying, relating to stone, turning to stone or feeling stony. Obviously the Petra there, Greek for stone.
Yeah, my final one is another one that I've seen a lot and I've inferred the meaning of it. It's diminution, which is reduction of size or importance relating to something like value. So the disease had no diminution, that kind of thing.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I didn't know that one. Yeah. And my last choice is actually two words, a nice little phrase, frozen cataract.
Ooh.
I was pretty sure what this was, but I did check it anyway. And of course, a cataract is a waterfall. But of course, there is that medical meaning as well with the condition in the eyes. I did wonder if there was any correlation between the two. You get one of those sort of like blurred vision with a cataract on the eye, if that was alluded to like having water in your eye or something like that. I don't know if there's a connection between the two. It seems odd to have one word for both of those things if there's no connection.
Yeah, it probably is. It's probably something to do with the effect, isn't it? But yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, if anybody knows out there, if we have any medically minded people in our listenership, please let us know, because I'd like to know the answer to that.
Yes, and any opticians especially, do let us know.
And also, Frozen Cataract sounds like a 90s industrial band from Germany.
There's our first band name.
Yep.
Spoiler alert coming up. We are going to get a band name that was actually a band I was in.
Whee.
I'll just line that up now. I was so excited when I saw it.
That's amazing.
So what have we got for the publication history on the Plutonian drug?
Well, it's quite an interesting one this time, because Smith began writing the story in February of 1932 before putting it aside for a month. Now, the reason he put it aside for a month can be explained by making our first delve into eccentric, impractical devils, the letters of Clark Ashton Smith and August Derleth, to a letter that he penned to Derleth dated February the 24th, 32. I've begun a short pseudo-scientific tale dealing with a drug that changed a man's perception of time into a sort of space perception. He saw himself as a continuous body, a sort of infinite frieze, stretching both into the past and future. The tale is hellishly hard to do. So yeah, it seems like Smith was struggling with this one. And he did that thing that I do, and I'm sure you do it as well. If you breach a wall in a story, you go, oh, for fuck's sake, you put it aside, you do something else and go back to it later, right? And usually it resolves itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, it percolates around the brain a little bit, doesn't it? And then, yeah.
Well, he finally completed it on April the 5th, 1932. Now, instead of subbing it to the usual suspects, Smith decided to try Amazing Stories, which is the oldest of the science fiction magazines. It was launched in 1926 by Hugo Gernsback, Hugo the Rat.
Hugo the Rat, yeah.
Yeah, and was the first magazine devoted solely to science fiction. Now, that mag is still going today and means that it's in its 99th year.
I remember mentioning that before. It's incredible, isn't it? That's some longevity, isn't it, for a magazine especially?
Yeah. Now, Gernsback was forced into bankruptcy in 1929, meaning that the magazine was sold to Tech Productions, who were a subsidiary of McFadden Publications, who were probably best known for True Detective magazine and True Story. You know, you must have seen the covers of those true crime detective magazines. So you'll have a woman in bondage on the front cover.
Yeah. She went in search of love and found murder.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I've got some of those. I've got some like in the back. They're brilliant. The covers are freaking works of art. And they also had the New York Evening Graphic. But the editor, when Smith subbed, was one T. O'Connor Sloan, As was his process, Sloane held on to the story for several months before giving Smith a yay or nay. Smith hadn't actually held up much hope, as he'd pretty much given up on the idea of them taking one of his stories. He'd written to Derleth back in October 15th, 1931. They seem to have a fixed prejudice against my stuff not being sufficiently scientific.
Right.
Yeah. So it must have been really frustrating to wait that long. I mean, it's bad enough when you do open submissions now and you're waiting like 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
But even worse then, because you can't really sub it anywhere else because they've got it, because it's physical.
Puts you in a sort of limbo, doesn't it? Yeah. And plus the financial aspect as well, of course, you know.
Yeah. So it was finally accepted around October the 27th, 32. So nearly 7 months after he submitted it.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, Smith wrote to Derleth on October the 27th, 32. Amazing Stories finally took the Plutonian Drug, but informed me that they are overstocked and won't be able to print it for quite a while. Their rates are amazingly low, 0.5 cent per word. So, yeah, it turns out it wasn't published until the September 1934 issue, almost 2 years later.
Jeez. And when they did publish it, he gets barely any money for it as well.
Yeah, he received 0.5 cent per word. Now, to put that into context, Weird Tales paid 1 cent a word, Wonder Stories 0.75 cents, and the Clayton outfit's Strange Tales paid 2 cents per word, which is why he would often punt for them.
That's quite a difference, isn't it?
Yeah. It's 0.5 cent a word. So he can't have got much for this because it's quite a short story. It's only like 10 pages, isn't it? So
yeah, Spotify springs to mind, doesn't it?
yeah, very much so. Yeah. Derleth later asked Smith to choose a favourite science fiction story for inclusion in a proposed anthology entitled Far From Time. And Smith chose this. So this was his favourite of his science fiction stories. Sadly, it doesn't look like that anthology ever materialised.
Ah, okay.
It never happened, unfortunately. So there you go.
Yeah, I think I first read this. There was an anthology put together by Michael Parry. I'm guessing it might have been in the 70s or 80s. It was a collection of weird fiction drug stories. I think The Hound of Tinderloss was in there. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I'm sure someone out there will know what I'm referring to. They had one of those, very striking 70s covers.
Yeah, some of those them pulp anthologies were great. There's a little bookshop in the open market down here, and they've got loads of them. When I get money, I'm going to go in and hoover them up because they've all got, like, just for the covers alone, they've got some brilliant covers on them. Yeah,
great artwork back then. It was the same with albums as well, wasn't it?
Oh man. Double gatefold.
We're only 10 minutes in and we're already moaning like two old gits.
Yeah, well. Yeah, if the cap fits.
So, yes, it's very apparent from the opening that we are sometime in the future, because we get mentions of these interplanetary expeditions to Alpha Centauri and other such places. We get a couple of names coming in here. We get Dr. Manners, who's the guy who's going to administer the dose, shall we say.
Oh, I chuckled at that straight away because that's like a character from a Carry On movie. It's like Carry On Doctor.
Yeah, Dr.
Manners.
Mind your manners.
Yeah.
And speaking of Carry On, funnily you mentioned that, we get the second name here, Alan Farquar, the Alan Farquar Expedition, which is our another band name. That's obviously a prog band, the Alan Farquar Expedition.
Yes.
Farquar is a name beloved of Carry On type writers.
Oh, yeah.
There's Farquar and Farquhar Harson.
Well, Kenneth Williams' character in Carry On Abroad was Stuart Farquar. I'm Stuart Farquar. Stupid what?
I thought I'd look this up. I'd always assumed this is one of those names that came over with the Normans. Like St. John and all that kind of stuff.
Ah, yeah, it makes sense.
No, well, it's actually Scottish.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's Scottish Gaelic from, and I'm going to murder the pronunciation here, Farquar, Fearchar. So it's Scottish origin, and it means beloved man. I suppose then that makes sense, because the son part, that's quite northern and Nordic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Farquhar's son, Farquharson. And yeah, the Farquharsons were quite a big clan in Scotland, apparently, and owned a lot of castles and such like.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think on your pronunciation, you didn't have enough phlegm in it for the Scottish Gaelic.
So yes, so we're in the future, and that's when we get this first idea of, well, this put me in mind of explorers on Earth going out into Africa or South America and coming back with all sorts of flora and fauna.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we have here is these expeditions going out into the solar system and coming back with all these interesting things. So from the moon, we get selenine or selenine, derived from a fossil lichen found by the first rocket expedition to the moon in 1975. So I think, when was the first landing? Was it 69, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, 69.
That's not far out, is it, really?
No. Yeah, I thought that was actually close to the selenine is actually close to selenite, which is a crystal known as liquid light. Because it cuts through blockages and allows energy to transfer.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah. So I wondered if that was any kind of bearing on it or just a coincidence.
Yeah, well, you do wonder what influences what sometimes, don't you, with these things?
Well, exactly.
Well, we then get our next name, Rupert Balcoth, the sculptor, who I can't help thinking is a stand-in for Smith, being a sculptor. Very typical, right? The protagonist is a poet or an author or a sculptor.
Yeah.
And that artistic aspect of his character is very much going to come into play later on, because obviously he's chatting to Dr. Manners, the scientist. So we get this idea of the analytical scientist and the creative type who's prone to flights of fancy or will perhaps be more receptive to the effects of a drug.
Yes. Yeah.
It always makes me laugh when I think of what the guy who discovered LSD, Hoffman, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and a story about he sort of dipped his finger in something and then accidentally licked his finger, and apparently had a very interesting bike ride home. I just think it's a wonderful idea of, I think he was Swiss, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, sort of clinician or, scientific guy riding on his bike through downtown Malmo or wherever he was, going, wow, look at the clouds, man.
Well, I often wonder that about like magic mushrooms and things like that. Which peasant first picked them and popped a handful of Liberty caps and was sitting there going, oh, wow. What's up with you, Beryl?
I bet they called him Mad Tom or something like that.
Yeah,
Mad Tom's here again.
Yeah, banging on about pink wildebeest or something. I don't know.
So yes, Rupert is the guest of Dr. Manners, and they get into this discussion about these various drugs and items. The next one is mineral water from Ganymede, whose effects are like those of the mythical fountain of youth. And that's given the name, I'm going to be careful how I say this, Clithny, Clithni. I'm definitely pronouncing that Clithny. Sounds Welsh, actually. Have you ever been to Clithny?
It does sound like a Welsh village, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. A clear emerald liquid rising in lofty geysers from the craters of quiescent volcanoes. The scientists believe that the drinking of Clithny is the secret of the almost fabulous longevity of the Ganymedians, and they think it may prove to be a similar elixir for humanity. So that's something as well, isn't it? When you have all these, pith helmeted guys going off, oh, we think we've discovered the secret, the fountain of youth, and, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, very common thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, plus all these exotic, in inverted commas, people they met, which kind of it's reflected here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Ganymede is the largest moon of Jupiter, right? There's people living on Jupiter's moon. Well, or there's beings living there.
Yeah.
Ganymede, by the way, I didn't know this, but it was a young man in Greek myth who Zeus became attracted to, and he was given the role, willing or not, of Zeus's cupbearer. Make of that what you will.
Indeed. Yes, so now after this, he sort of moves on to the drugs that haven't been quite so beneficial to mankind, such as a Martian poison that has greatly facilitated the gentle art of murder. I like that line. That's a nice line.
Yes, that's a very nice phrase. And then we move on to a Venerian narcotic, which I'm presuming is from Venus. And I am told that Murovka, the Venerian narcotic, is far worse in its effects on the human system than is any terrestrial alkaloid. Alkaloids, of course, are the poisons, right?
Yeah, things like strychnine, arsenic, thallium, all that kind of stuff.
Then they make the observation, they share that liability with any number of our native drugs. Man, as ever, has the choice of good and evil. I suppose that the Martian poison you speak of is akpaloli, the juice of a common russet yellow weed that grows in the oases of Mars. The oases of Mars. There we go. He's knocking out the band names today, isn't he?
That's a good one, isn't it?
And this stuff is colourless, tasteless, without odour, and it kills almost instantly, leaving no trace. Pretty useful one, that, eh?
Yeah, so it would definitely replace inheritance powder, wouldn't it? Well, that's what the Victorians used to call arsenic, wasn't it? Inheritance powder.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get this. There's an infinite lot still to be learned about many of these ultra-terrene substances, and their virtues have often been discovered quite by accident. That's a bit grim, isn't it? We're back to Hoffman on his bike, except if someone did that with the Martian one, they presumably died of a heart attack. That's the verdict.
Well, again, my mind goes back to mushrooms, because, again, it's like the poisonous ones. I mean, people have known this going way back, right? Which ones you can eat and which ones you can't, which means that at some point, some poor sod ate a death cap, you know?
Yeah.
But so all this kind of stuff was discovered by trial and error, what we can eat, what we can't eat.
Totally. And then we get into this mention of the earth narcotics, because we go back to the Manovka. Though allied in a way to the earth narcotics such as opium and hashish, it is of little use for anesthetic or anodyne purposes. Its chief effects are an extraordinary acceleration of the time sense and a heightening and telescoping of all sensations, whether pleasurable or painful. So this was like a sort of type of amphetamine, isn't it, really?
Yeah, uber speed.
Yeah. With the downside that you feel like you've gone through an extended period of time in a short space of time, but your body reflects that in a physical aging.
Oh, that'd be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's like sort of crack on crack, isn't it? That, you know.
Well, that'd be a nightmare. Imagine if that actually happened with amphetamines. I'd look like the Mummy or something.
Oh dear. Well, your teeth are looking okay on it, I have to say, because that's usually the first thing. You can always tell one of the classic old speed freaks. So,
oh, can't you just? Yeah.
They've got no Amsteds.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, it's true. It's very, very true.
And this is where we get on to the first mention of plutonium. Alcoth says he's never heard about this. Tell me about it. And the doctor replies, well, I can do better than that. I can show you some, though it's not much to look at. Merely a fine white powder, isn't it always?
It is indeed. I like this little detail here. It's Smith's world building again, right? It's stealth world building. Dr. Manners rose from the pneumatic cushioned chair. Pneumatic cushioned chair.
I know. What's a pneumatic cushion? What does that look like? I was trying to picture that.
Yeah.
You sort of sit there and go,
yeah.
Does it gradually pumps up or something?
Pump it up, yeah.
Pump it up. Yeah.
Till you can feel it. Yeah.
And of course, as the name suggests, this is from Pluto, so we get a little bit of future history on Pluto. Plutonium, explained Manners, as its name would indicate, comes from forlorn frozen Pluto, which only one terrestrial expedition has so far visited, the expedition led by the Cornell brothers, John and Augustine, which started in 1990 and did not return to Earth till 1996. John Cornell died during the return voyage, together with half the personnel of the expedition, and the others reached Earth with only one reserve oxygen tank remaining. So again, in that world building, we get a little bit of drama and a little bit of a sort of history there as well.
Mm.
And you have to speculate, why did half of the personnel die? What went on there? That raises a little question, doesn't it?
Well, it does, doesn't it? Especially here in the next breath, he says, this vial contains about 1/10 of the existing supply of plutonium. So you've got to wonder, was it some, freak out drug experiment that went horrifically wrong and they ended up tumbling out of an airlock or something? And,
Yeah. I mean, there's a sci-fi movie plot in itself, isn't it? They find a strange substance. One of the crew takes it. You're into like sort of Event Horizon territory, aren't you? That sort of thing.
Well, interestingly, I actually watched Species 2 the other day for the Monster in My Bed podcast with Zoe. And the beginning of that starts with a Martian expedition. And they go to Mars and they start drilling out rock samples. And obviously one of these samples has got the alien parasite thing in it, and it thaws out on the ship and splat, and then so yeah, it's similar kind of thing, right? One of them goes, that stuff looks remarkably like Coke, pass me a $5.
Wow. But don't you think you're saying about the experimentation and all this stuff earlier? This wasn't necessarily done for scientific discovery, was it? It was.
No.
I thought, that looks quite tasty. Let's try eating that and see what happens. God, I dare you, Thog. Go on, eat that one.
yeah, that bright orange one with the spots. Go on, give it a whirl.
So I'll just mention before we get into the rest of this a little bit about Pluto. Pluto is a place we've spoken about quite a lot because, of course, in mythos terms, we've got Yuggoth in the waste and the Migo and various other things. Well, I suppose the solar system in general, right? We've got the cats of Saturn and all that kind of stuff going on.
Mm.
But Pluto, of course, whether it is still classed as a planet is open to some discussion. It was discovered in 1930 by Clyde W. Tombaugh and was classified as a dwarf planet. But the International Astronomical Union, I think it was in 2006, said, no, it's not a planet, it's too small. And the debate still goes on. So to some people it's a planet, to some it's an asteroid or whatever.
Well, it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, wasn't it? Was one of the people who declassified it. And my God, he copped a lot of stick for it.
Yeah. And the name Pluto, of course, is the Greek god of the underworld. The Roman equivalent was Hades. And Pluto was one of the 6 surviving children of Saturn, and 2 of his brothers were Jupiter and Neptune. So hence the naming of these few planets all in a row. Nice little family connection between the planets.
Yeah.
But things take a darker turn when we get onto plutonium, the real plutonium. This was first isolated in 1940 and 41. It was known as element 94 before that. I think people had discovered it or been aware of it as element 94, but it wasn't actually isolated until, sort of 6 or 7 years after this was written.
Yeah.
And it was isolated in something called a cyclotron in California. I thought the cyclotrons were in Battle Beyond the Stars or something like that. Or Battlestar Galactica, weren't they, the cyclotrons?
The Cylons, yeah.
That was it. And of course, this stuff was very much in demand by the Manhattan Project, who were building the first American nuclear bomb. So that's grim enough, but then it gets grimmer because they started injecting plutonium into animals and also into people who were suffering from terminal illnesses. But between 1945 and 1947, the US government also injected people with plutonium without their informed consent. And this was covered up until, I think it was into the 2000s, it eventually all came out.
It probably at the same time that things like MK Ultra was declassified. It would have been around the same sort of thing.
Yeah. So, a little bit of dark history there. And, well, mankind never fails to disappoint, does it? You know, when it comes to doing shit things.
Really doesn't. Well, actually, that makes a nice little segue to something I wanted to bring up about this story. I just want a quick aside here about a film, a movie called Banshee Chapter, which is a take on H.P. Lovecraft's From Beyond. But it's done in a completely different way. It's not got like a resonator or anything like that. It's all done with DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which stimulates the pineal gland, right? And that was actually one of the things used by MK Ultra. But basically, I'll just read you a little blurb here. A young journalist follows the trail of an illegal government research chemical that might have caused the disappearance of her close friend, after testing it on himself as an experiment. After tracing the substance to a desert ranch of an infamous 70s novelist, she's drawn into an experience of terror and frightening entities that she cannot escape. Now, the reason I bring it up now is because, yes, it was inspired by From Beyond, but I can't help wondering if this bit that we're about to get into didn't influence it as well. The bit with her friend, because he's got hold of this stuff and he's got his mate there to monitor him while he takes it, and he goes on this fabulous trip and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's echoes of this and Hounds of Tindalos very much.
Yes, of course. And we were just chatting earlier. I think the Hounds of Tindalos was written in 29.
Yes,
I believe so, a few years before this. And I remember the drug there being called Liao.
Yep.
And well, it was made in China as the name.
Chinese alchemists.
Chinese alchemists, yeah. But there was also a mention of it in, I think it was the Vermis Mysterious or something like that.
Yes.
I think it was where he gets it from. So it does seem to have quite a parallel with the Plutonian drug in terms of its effects, doesn't it? So again, I don't know if Smith had read that and was aware of that. I mean, there were so many ideas going backwards and forwards between them, as we'll find out later on when we get to the letters in terms of time travel as well. Because, of course, Lovecraft produced his own take on time travel a year or so after this as well.
Indeed, he did. Yeah. Well, drugs have been used quite a lot in mythos since then. I mean, I've done stories with drugged up band members seeing the void, and
Yeah, I wrote Innsmouth Acid set in Boston in 1967, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a wonderful medium for weird fiction, isn't it? Drugs. If you go all the way through it, and one of the other inspirations on Banshee Chapter was Hunter S. Thompson.
Right.
It's basically From Beyond meets Fear and Loathing. Now, which is interesting because somebody has done Fear and Loathing in Arkham.
Yes, I saw
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head. There's also an Alan Moore short story, which is focused around the sort of 80s music scene and has King in Yellow references. Yeah, it can be found in the Starry Wisdom, that Dark Horse anthology, which takes similar turns. So yeah, drugs and mythos just seems to work, doesn't it?
Yeah, that world of unreliable narrator and derangement of the senses. William S. Burroughs. We were speaking about Eraserhead just recently on the Innsmouth book club.
Indeed. Yep.
All of these things play into that area, don't they, where reality is shifted or altered in some way, or that the veil is removed. You see beyond the normal mundane world.
Yeah, to remove the veil and see the great god Pan.
There we go. See, it all goes back to Arthur.
It does. It all goes back to the Welsh wizard.
So I thought it was interesting as well because it tells us how plutonium was discovered. The geologists of the party found the stuff when they began prying beneath the solidified gases that cover the surface of that dim, starlit planet in an effort to learn more about its composition and history. Like selenine, the stuff is a byproduct of vegetable fossilization. Doubtless it is many billion years old and dates back to the time when Pluto possessed enough internal heat to make possible the development of certain rudimentary plant forms on its blind surface. It must have had an atmosphere then, though no evidence of former animal life was found by the Cornells. What I like about this as well is the solar system has got this history. if we think of Smith's planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, as you go out, they've all got a history. Some have still got things living on them. Some have got ancient civilizations that have largely disappeared, but there are still remnants around. And by the time you get out to Pluto, yeah, there used to be an atmosphere and stuff going on, but now there's not even a trace of that. I thought that's like his world building, but now on a cosmic or on a solar system scale.
Yeah, my brain went instantly to, is this a fossilized Migo? Somebody snorting a Migo, you know?
Snorting a Migo. Oh, dear. Ground, powdered.
Ground and powdered Migo.
Like a sort of snuff. Put that in your snuff box.
Oh, a picture fungi from Yugoth. Yeah.
Well, you're back to your shrooms.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, and this plutonium was discovered in a crystalloid condition, but turned immediately to the fine powder that you see as soon as it was exposed to air in the rocket ship. It's soluble in water, forming a permanent colloid, without the least sign of deposit, no matter how long it remains in suspension. And of course, Balkoth asks the inevitable question, what does it do?
Yeah.
Here we go.
As soon as anyone's talking about a drug, it's like, well, what does it do then? Come on, get to the good stuff.
It's our warning to the curious. Although, funnily enough, this seems to have an extremely powerful effect with no real consequences. Well, at least not consequences from the drug itself.
Mm.
And here we go. Here we get a little bit about that return journey. So I think it's like exactly as you said, a member of the expedition, half delirious with space fever, so there was something happening there, got hold of the unmarked jar containing it and took a small dose, imagining that it was bromide of potassium. And the effects basically allow you to see time, to look back in time, and to look ahead in time. I like that little mention I think you spoke about in the publication history. It sort of changes time into space. It becomes a physical thing that you can see past and future. It's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, which is very similar to the effects of the owl.
Yeah.
And also very similar because, again, that was kind of inspired by House in the Borderlands. It's kind of similar to what happens in that, isn't it? That big trip that the narrator goes on in the middle of House in the Borderland. It's time is, to quote True Detective, time is a flat circle. You know?
It all ties in, man. It all ties in. There is, as clearly as I can put it, an altering of the perception of time, of actual duration, into a sort of space perception. One sees the past and also the future in relation to one's own physical self, like a landscape stretching away on either hand. You don't see very far, merely the events of a few hours in each direction, but it's a very curious experience, and it helps to give you a new slant on the mystery of time and space.
I like this little bit here where he's talking about, because again, this ties in with what I was saying about Banshee Chapter and lots of other mythos stories that involve drugs. It all goes back to the pineal gland. It all goes back to the great god Pan, right? It all goes back to that. Because we've got here, just what it does to one, I'm not sure. Perhaps it merely produces a derangement or metamorphosis of sensations, like hashish. Or perhaps it serves to stimulate some rudimentary organ, some dormant sense of the human brain. So it all goes back to the pineal gland, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the From Beyond obviously tied right into that as well. So
absolutely, yeah.
A sort of common theme at the time, it seemed, among these guys.
Yeah, well, that actually comes from the Victorians, didn't it? They were obsessed with the pineal gland. That's why you got like pine cones on everything and things like that.
Ah,
yeah.
Right. And Balkoth is playing it cool right here. I quite like this. Yeah, sounds very interesting. I've never tampered much with narcotics myself. Isn't that great? Although I did experiment once or twice in my young romantic days with cannabis indica. I had been reading Gautier and Baudelaire.
It is Smith, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Gautier and Baudelaire and smoking the old reefer.
Yeah, into your romantic poets. And Now Baudelaire, of course, I was familiar with. French poet, essayist, translator and art critic. Les Fleurs du Mal, published in 1857. Extremely controversial upon publication, with 6 of its poems censored due to their immorality. And of course, the poems are all on themes relating to decadence, eroticism, obsession with death, and aspiration towards an ideal world. So I think he was a sort of proto-goth, really, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. And a massive inspiration on Smith and W.H. Pugmire.
Yes. Yeah.
Pugmire actually wrote a poem to Baudelaire and things like that. But Smith went further with Smith because Smith actually translated him.
Oh, of course. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think Baudelaire, there was a big influence in the 60s, wasn't there, with a lot of that sort of, the Doors generation, people like Baudelaire and Blake and everything.
Byron, Polidori, yeah.
What was Blake's quote again? It was something like the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, wasn't it? Or something like that.
That's the one.
Yeah, which I think Morrison picked up on very much.
He did. Yes, very much so. Well, yeah, opening the doors of perception and all that.
Yes.
That's where the name comes
from.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Gautier was not a name familiar to me in poetic terms, but he was around at the same time as Baudelaire. He was a contemporary of Baudelaire, also a poet, art critic, and an essayist. Now, I just wanted to read this out. The 2 little facts about him here that caught my eye. The young Gautier's appearance was flamboyant, defying conventionality by his flowing hair and far-famed scarlet waistcoat. Sounds like a chap, doesn't he?
He sounds like the sort of bloke to go down the pub with, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And apparently in his youth, Gautier was dashing, athletic, amorous and mercurial. He was tall and robust. His hair was a wayward flood. His eyes were blue and victorious. He was the image of young France. His strength was proverbial. He outdid Dante. He swam from Marseille to the Chateau d'If and then swam back. Women fell in love with him at once.
Nice.
So, yeah, almost like a French Byron, that sounds like, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much. That's what I was thinking. But it was interesting because you prefaced that by saying in poetic terms, because I bet you did what I did. As soon as you read the name Gautier, you thought about Euro trash, right? You thought
British gems.
Yeah, you thought of Jean-Paul, right?
Yeah. To be fair, he's every bit as dashing in his own way.
Indeed. Yeah. Every bit as flamboyant.
So Manners says, all right, okay, yeah, so you've done a bit of dope, okay, but, so what? Plutonium is altogether different. You get the maximum result from the very first dose. I think it would interest you greatly, Balkoth, since you are a sculptor by profession. You would see some unusual plastic images, not easy to render in terms of Euclidean planes and angles. Hey, there we go. Mythos bingo.
Mm-hmm.
I'd gladly give you a pinch of it now if you'd care to experiment.
Yeah, I like the response. You're pretty generous, aren't you, since the stuff is so rare? So what's the catch?
Yeah. Well, the catch is he's got to write an essay after, right? Because here's where we get this idea. I plan to write a monograph on ultra-terrestrial alkaloids, and you might give me some valuable data. With your type of brain and your highly developed artistic sense, the visions of plutonium should be uncommonly clear and significant. Band name number 4 or 5, Visions of Plutonium, or perhaps an album.
Mm.
So yeah, again, this idea that because someone is artistic, he'll better be able to articulate the experience is interesting. Maybe there's something in that, I don't know.
But again, that's a common trope. I mean, like, that's, it's the thing. Let's get an artist to try this new strain of wacky backy and see if he sees God. It's
yeah.
All goes back to Dr. Timothy Leary's blotter paper, doesn't it? The entirety of the 1960s music scene was founded on.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And I was getting real 60s Leary vibes on this because this is now about the setting and, put a little bit of bark on in the background, turn the lights down a bit, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We get an antique whiskey glass, which is filled to the rim with some golden red liquid. And then we get a small pinch of plutonium added, which dissolved immediately and without effervescence. The liquid is a wine made from a sweet Martian tuber known as uvra, he explained. It is light and harmless and will counteract the bitter taste of the plutonium. Drink it quickly and then lean back in your chair.
Yeah, which is, again, this is why I was recalling that movie, is because you have the bit at the beginning, it's like done like found footage of him taking it. And she's obviously trying to find him because he's vanished. But later when she goes to see this Hunter S. Thompson type character, he pegs her for what she is. She's trying to be undercover, but he pegs her for what she is and drops some of the DMT into a whiskey when she's not looking.
Mm.
And then they both go on this trip, which goes like from beyond, you know, kind of thing. It's a really good film, actually. It's one of those that I went into thinking, oh, this could be a pile of crap, but it's not. It's actually a really, really good cosmic horror movie.
Yeah, I've seen the name bandied about a bit here and there, and probably like you, I think, oh, low budget, you know, I'll get around to that someday. Yeah, but I shall make a point of watching that this weekend now. If it's got the Mendes thumbs up, then
I really like it. Yeah, I really like it. But I think you will as well, because it goes very much some 70s psychedelic kind of vibes.
Oh yeah, that's my thing. That's my thing, man. Yeah. Now, speaking of that, Balkoth, before he drinks this, does ask the question, look, it's 9:15 now. I've got to leave at 10 to keep an appointment. So now it's quite interesting in a story about time travel. He's keeping an eye on the watch, isn't it? Keeping an eye on the time. And Manners says, well, that's all right. That gives us 45 minutes. You'll have a 30-minute trip. Then you've got 15 minutes to describe it to me. He's got it all worked out, hasn't he?
This actually brought to mind salvia, or sage's basil, which can be smoked, and it's what the shamans use. Shamanic basil.
Right,
yeah, but
right.
Shamanic. Well, that's what it's known as, shaman's basil.
That's what they called that first guy who took the mushrooms.
Shaman's sage, not basil. That's me going wrong. Yeah, shaman's sage. Yeah, shamanic basil. We'll keep that. Well, yeah, we'll keep that in the back pocket and bring that out at some point.
Absolutely.
But again, the effects are supposed. I've never actually done salvia, but apparently a friend of mine has, and it's the most intense psychedelic sort of trip. But it lasts like 15 minutes.
Oh, right.
So you smoke it and you go off, and it's what the native tribes in America use for dream walking, spirit walking. You know, and they sit there with them big pipes you see in the movies and pass it around, and these people go on these weird psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
There you go.
Nice. That's put me in mind of talking about the 70s and psychedelia, the Carlos Castaneda books and all that kind of stuff as well.
Oh, yeah.
Don Juan, which was all exposed as being whatever it was. But, you know, nonetheless, they were an interesting read at the time. And I like, again, there's a little bit of world building here because we don't need this detail, but it's got an appointment at the Belvedere Club with the billionaire Cloud Vishaven, who wants me to do a bas relief in pseudo jade and neo jasper for the hall of his country mansion. Pseudo jade and neo jasper.
Well, that's obviously a concession to it being futuristic, isn't it?
Yeah.
A future story. It's a Neo Jasper. That sounds like a character from some weird anime, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? That's quite. I'm thinking that's another. We're getting a lot of good names out of this one, aren't we? Neo Jasper. Yeah. Could be a character in Blade Runner, couldn't it?
Yeah, Cyberpunk 2077 or something. Yeah.
So Balkoth is satisfied that he's going to get to his meeting on time. He empties the little antique glass at a gulp and leans back on the deep pneumatic cushions of the chair. And now we get one of these classic Smith journey sequences. And we've spoken about this many times, whether people go through a mirror and end up on Saturn, whether they go into some sort of portal, or in this case, they take a drug.
Drink some Atlantean wine.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's one of these journeys from here to somewhere else. He continued to fall and float through eternal mist, in which all things were dissolved as in the primordial nebulae of chaos. After a timeless interval, the mist, which had been uniformly grey and hueless at first, took on a flowing iridescence, never the same for 2 successive moments, and a sense of gentle falling turned to a giddy revolution, as if he were caught in an ever-swiftning vortex. Coincidentally with his movement in this whirlpool of prismatic splendour, he seemed to undergo an indescribable mutation of the senses. The whirling colours, by subtle, ceaseless gradations, became recognisable as solid forms. Emerging as if by an act of creation from the infinite chaos, they appeared to take their place in an equally infinite vista. The feeling of movement through decrescent spirals was resolved into absolute immobility. Farquar was no longer conscious of himself as a living organic body. He was an abstract eye. Boom, there's our band name.
Abstract eye. Love it.
So I was in a band called the Surfadelics in the sort of mid-80s, which was like a sort of surf garage outfit. And they had a song called Abstract Eye. And later on, when I got back into music, we formed a sort of psychedelic cover band doing stuff from sort of 67 to 72 kind of era. And that was the name I settled on for the band, Abstract Eye. So that's a song and a band name, Abstract Eye.
Awesome. Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I couldn't help thinking of Danielle Dax because she did an album called Dark Adapted Eye. I was like, okay.
And Smith sets this up very nicely, of course. He describes it so well that you're not really a thing anymore. You're just an eye. You're just an observer. And it's almost like physically, well, he says he's gazing simultaneously in 2 directions. It's like looking to the left to the past and then looking to the right to the future at the same time. And both of these things stretch away into the distance.
A weird, peculiar landscape traversed by an unbroken frieze or bas relief of human figures that ran like a straight, undeviating wall. So that's incredibly visual, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Just got this wall of statues kind of stretching on into infinity. It's
And this gave me a couple of visual images. There was one, do you remember those old black and white films where they'd film someone walking? I think they were done to sort of plot how the body moves and that sort of stuff. I think there was one with a horse.
Yes.
And then I remember seeing something else where I can't remember the technical term for it, but when there's a movement, you still see a bit of the frame before. So you get this person moves, but you can see the lines of their previous movement. I'm not sure exactly what the term for that is.
It also brought to mind to me, 80s music videos. Was that effect, that what I call the Ummagumma effect, like the reflections and the thing.
Yeah.
You always got it on guitarists, didn't you, when they were doing a solo? They were like, go widdly, 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 and you get like the guitar like going off into infinity, sort of thing.
That's the kind of thing. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. When do you ever get a guitarist not doing a bloody solo? Eh?
Yeah, so there you go.
And then we get this neat description of how he looks back, first of all. So he sees Dr. Manners in the chair. And then basically he goes all the way back to him arriving at Dr. Manners' house and everything that's happened up till now. So that's the past. And then he turns to the right and he looks into the future. So he sees himself sitting in the chair again. And now he sees events as they're going to unfold when he comes back out of the trip. He sees himself standing, chatting to the doctor for a while, shaking hands, leaving the apartment, going down the lift, out into the street toward the Belvedere Club. The club was only 3 blocks away on another street, and the shortest route after the first block was along a narrow alley between office building and a warehouse. Balkoff had meant to take this alley, and in his vision, he saw the bas relief of his future figure passing along the straight pavement with a background of deserted doorways and dim walls that towered from sight against the extinguished stars. So this is already a little bit foreboding, isn't it? We've got deserted doorways and extinguished stars.
Yeah, I like this this next little line he's got here. It's incredibly evocative. He seemed to be alone. There were no passers. only the silent, glimmering, endlessly repeated angles of arc-lit walls and windows that accompanied his repeated figure. So that gives to me proper dystopian, cyberpunky kind of vibes. It's all these dark alleys, like greasy puddles and arc-lit and all this kind of stuff, right? It's got that sort of future dystopia feel to it. Even though it's not really done much of the future setting, there's enough there to get the brain sort of thinking, oh, this is a bit like Blade Runner.
It is, isn't it? And we're down at ground level, right? We're talking about streets and alleyways and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it is that, even without him saying it, perhaps, the Doctor is living in his nice mansion or skyscraper type thing or something else, but this is life still at ground level. It hasn't really progressed much at all. And this is where we get, I don't know if it's the punchline of the story, because it's quite sort of easy to see what's coming with what Smith describes here, right? You can work it out fairly easily.
Yeah.
He saw himself following the alley like a stream in some profound canyon, and there midway the strange vision came to an abrupt, inexplicable end, without the gradual blurring into formless mist that had marked his retrospective view of the past. So it's like the vision just suddenly stops at that point, and there's just darkness beyond that.
A dead end.
There we go. A cul-de-sac, a definite dead end. Yeah.
Yeah. The sculpture-like frieze with its architectural ground appeared to terminate, broken off clean and sharp, in a gulf of immeasurable blackness and nullity. The last wave-like duplication of his own person, the vague doorway beyond it, the glimmering alley pavement, all were seen as if shorn asunder by a falling sword of darkness, leaving a vertical line of cleavage beyond which there was nothing. Now, I did have to read that bit because of the line, vertical line of cleavage. So yeah.
I was going to say, you did well to keep a straight face on that. I thought an interesting thing about this, well, no, let's talk about that at the end. We don't want to give away the ending just yet. So that's the vision, and he's sort of thinking about this, and now the trip begins to end, and he's drawn back to the present, and he comes to himself. He's seated in a pneumatic chair with Dr. Manners opposite. Apart from a little bit of sort of weird feeling, he feels fine. There's been no after effects of the drug. But he does have a singularly clear and vivid memory of the almost ineffable experience. Obviously, he recounts what he's seen to Manners, who you can imagine is sat there jotting it all down on his notepad. A Manners' question this is how you must have seen 5 or 6 hours of the past, but the vista of the future, you only saw a little bit. You leave here, maybe 40 minutes or so ahead. I've never known the drug to act so unequally. Usually past and future perspectives have been about the same in their extent. And Balkoth is really trying to grasp how you can see into the future, because that hasn't happened yet. How can you see something that hasn't happened and doesn't exist? So that's one of the central things of the whole time travel genre, right?
Of course.
But Manners has a theory. I can think of only one explanation at all intelligible to our finite minds. This is that all the events which compose the stream of time have already happened, are happening, and will continue to happen forever. In our ordinary state of consciousness, we perceive with the physical senses merely that moment which we call the present. Under the influence of plutonium, you are able to extend the moment of present cognition in both directions, and to behold simultaneously a portion of that which is normally beyond perception. So I thought this is our idea again, isn't it, of looking at 10-dimensional beings in 3-dimensional or with 3-dimensional apparatus, and how mankind is so limited in the extent of our perception.
Yeah, it's interesting because earlier when Smith is talking about the guy's trip, he mentioned it being tri-dimensional, which is quite an interesting. So yeah, past, present, future.
Yeah, so I mean, we can talk about theories of time and space and everything else. I don't know what the current thinking is on that. Us being artists, of course, rather than scientists, we're very well equipped to describe it, but not so much to explain it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's why when earlier we're looking at, I was looking at some of these like mineral, the selenite and things like that, and it's coming. I was reading the entry about it on the internet, and it's getting into all these sort of, terms, and it gave me a headache. It's I know very little about chemistry.
So that's pretty much it. Well, Balkoth says, well, I've got to be going. And Manners says, oh, thanks very much. And Manners gives him a little warning, goes, well, maybe you shouldn't go down that alleyway. Seems a little bit odd. And Balkoth sort of laughs it off and sets off on what is fated to be his last journey.
Because he is quite nicely done, this little bit. I'm still at a loss to comprehend the abrupt cleavage and termination of your prospect of the future. The alley in which it seemed to end was Folman Alley, I suppose your shortest route to the Belvedere. If I were you, Balkoth, I'd take another route, even if it requires a few minutes extra. And Balkoth laughs it off. That sounds rather sinister. Yeah, well, it is, isn't it?
It is, but he does what they always do in these stories, right? He laughs it off, even though, as he leaves the building, he feels the touch of a momentary shadow as the passing of some night bird on noiseless wings. What could it mean, that gulf of infinite blackness into which the weird frieze of his future had appeared to plunge like a frozen cataract? And he gets this sense of déjà vu, which I suppose you would. I mean, this is the definition of déjà vu, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
He reaches the entrance of Falman Alley and took out his watch. Now, he could sort of go round the block and not go down the alley, but this patron, Claude, is very strict on punctuality. Obviously, he doesn't want to miss out on this job, so he thinks, sod it, I'm going down the alley, save a few minutes. The place appeared to be entirely deserted as in his vision. Midway, Balkoth approached the half-seen door, which had formed the termination of the time prospect. The door was his last visual impression, for something descended on his head at that moment, and his consciousness was blotted out by the supervening night he had pre-visioned. He had been sandbagged very quietly and efficiently by a 21st century thug. The blow was fatal, and time, as far as Balkoth was concerned, had come to an end.
Yeah. Now, the first thing I thought, because flashing back to a phrase Smith used back here, he talks about it being cut off by a sword. It's the sword of Damocles.
Oh, yes.
It's a metaphor for the sword of Damocles, isn't it? Because it's been hanging over his head, da-da-da-da-da, bang. Yeah.
Nice. And presumably hanging over his head for all his life, because this feels like it's predestined.
Yeah.
The future is set, Yeah,
exactly. So, yeah, my brain instantly just went, sword of Damocles. Yeah.
Well, your brain is obviously much more cultured than mine. Because I thought two things. First, I thought, is it better to be sandbagged or teabagged? I think we know the answer to that. And the second thing was 21st Century Thug. There's a great album name.
Oh, yeah.
I can almost imagine that being a Mott the Hoople album or something.
Or even somebody like Sieg Sieg Sputnik.
21st Century Thug. Who was... There was 20th Century Schizoid Man, wasn't it? Was that
King Crimson?
King Crimson, yeah.
Oh, what a tune that is!
Yeah,
dun, 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 dun.
So that's an update of that, right?
Yeah.
I always put you've got to have sort of Clockwork Orange type cover for that, haven't you?
Oh, you'd have to. Band dressed up as droogs. Yeah. Fiddy well, brother.
Fiddy well. Bit of the old ultra violence.
Bit of the in out and in out. Yeah.
So I thought an interesting thing with this is perhaps in a way this reveals Smith's views on religion and the afterlife, because there's nothing. There's just this void, a blackness. Either that, or even though his senses, his perception has been widened, he still can't see beyond the veil of death. So I guess that could be read either way.
That's interesting thought. Yeah.
There we go then, the Plutonian Drug. Quite an effective little story. I think the ending is a little bit obvious. I don't know how much Smith intended that to be a twist ending. or more just one of the Comte Cruel things, isn't it? Just the ironic twist.
I see it as a Comte Cruel, pretty much.
Yeah. The the old thing again of, curiosity getting you into trouble. Perhaps knowing too much can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Although there is that other sense in that he had the information there, but he chose to ignore it.
This is it. Warning to the curious, no digging here. So we've already had a look into eccentric, impractical devils. Was there anything in Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill?
We have quite a few mentions of the Plutonian drug, but again, most of it is just that, one line, oh, I've sent this off, I hope it gets accepted, etc., etc. But we do have one letter from Smith to HPL, which refers to something that HPL is thinking about writing. So I'll read both of those out. And of course, that gives me a chance to do 2 lots of return addresses.
Hey, always good.
So this is Smith to Lovecraft, 15th of March, 1932. The marble demon-haunted house of Evictes at the hour of the impingement of the shadow. Dear H. Pale, I hope to have the Plutonian drug, the time-space thing I mentioned, finished before long. Your idea for a time transition tower is magnificent, and I hope you will develop it. The possibilities are enormous. So, bearing in mind this was written in 1932, this is in response to something that Lovecraft wrote previously outlining this idea he had. And Lovecraft's letter is dated the 2nd of March, 1932. Leaden hillside of Penuph on the green-litten planet Ha in dimension N, hour of the voice and vapour from the bottomless cleft. Dear Clark Ashton.
Bottomless cleft. Oh, that's a good one, that, isn't it?
It's better than a cleftless bottom, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Your new plot idea sounds titanically vivid and alluring, though as you say, it will require vast skill in development. I have a sort of time idea of very simple nature floating around in the back of my head, but don't know when I shall ever get round to using it. The notion is that of a race in primal Lomar, perhaps even before the founding of Alaathe and the heyday of Hyperborean Comorium, who gained a knowledge of all arts and sciences by sending thought streams ahead to drain the minds of men in future ages, angling in time, as it were. Now and then they get hold of a really competent man of learning and annex all his thoughts. Usually they only keep their victims tranced for a short time, but once in a while, when they need some special piece of continuous information, one of their number sacrifices himself for the race and actually changes bodies with the first thoroughly satisfactory victim he finds. The victim's brain then goes back to 100,000 BC into the hypnotist's body to live in Lomar for the rest of his life, while the hypnotist from dead eons animates the modern clay of his victims. Complications can be imagined. I have no idea how or from what angle I shall elaborate the thing. So, obviously, that became
Shadow Out of Time.
Shadow Out of Time, which I think was written about 34, I think.
Something like that. I mean, it was one of his later ones, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty much one of his last stories, I think, wasn't it?
It was, because Haunter of the Dark was his last one. And I think, yeah, if it wasn't just before that, it was just before that one.
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. He had that idea pretty much fully formed there, but it took him a couple of years to actually get that down on paper.
Well, you know what that's like. I've got notebooks upon notebooks of ideas that I will hopefully get around to writing at some point. If not, I hope an August Derleth or a Lynn Carter comes along and does them for me after I popped it, you know.
It did then get me thinking about time travel. Obviously, there's a wide range of time travel books and films and that kind of stuff because it's a topic that any writer can have a field day with.
Yeah.
I suppose the obvious one is Time Machine, right? H.G. Wells. 1895 probably still stands as the classic, and the film, I think, the Rod Taylor film.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that clear. You didn't mean that god awful remake.
Do you know, I did watch that, and I can't remember anything about it.
That's the problem, innit?
Yeah, yeah.
Like the remake of War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise one. Again, I've watched it, but I can't remember a single thing about it because it was just completely forgettable. Whereas I can remember the original vividly, the 50s one.
Oh, the scene with the seasons changing around him and the Blitz on London and all that stuff, and then of course the Morlocks. Yeah, so many great scenes in it, and of course a most marvelous time machine as well.
I've got to hand it to the writers of The Big Bang Theory, right?
I knew you were going to mention that. Yeah, yeah.
There's a great line because there's an episode where they get the actual prop. Right, and you say, Penny, this is a time machine. Oh, get out of it. It looks like something Elton John would ride through the Everglades.
That's good. That's good. That's good. But that is the quintessential steampunk bit of kit, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
So other notable literary additions to the genre include Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, the story of Billy Pilgrim. It sort of travels backwards and forwards in his life, doesn't it? It's very well written, that one.
Yeah.
And now, I was saying to Tim at the start as well, I often bring up Star Trek, the original series, when we're talking about Smith, because I'm sure there is some connection. I'm sure Roddenberry was a Smith fan. There's even phrases like a 5-year mission and one or two other things that we've spoken about in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek, of course, has had a number of time travel incidents or episodes in the various series and films. They came back to Earth in one of the Star Trek movies with the Save the Whale, wasn't it? The blue whales. Where are the nuclear vessels?
Oh, yeah.
But if we go back to the original series, there was an episode called City on the Edge of Forever, where basically McCoy goes a bit nuts. I think he takes some sort of drug or something. So there's a drug thing going on there. And they're beamed down to this place where there's a time portal that McCoy jumps through and ends up in New York, sort of modern day New York or modernish day. And of course, they have to go through and get him. And this is where Kirk falls in love with Joan Collins. Then we get that idea she has to die in the car accident. Of course, he wants to save her, but if he saves her, the whole of history could be changed.
Indeed. Yeah.
That story was written by one Harlan Ellison, who you may remember from the Smith documentary Emperor of Dreams, of course.
Indeed, yeah. He did a number of time travel-y things. There was the demon with the glass hands and the soldier, which inspired Terminator.
Oh, right. Oh, I didn't know that.
Terminator was basically a rip-off of the soldier.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And just one other book I wanted to mention as well, because it's a favourite of mine, an author called Tim Powers, who I like all of his books. On Stranger Tides will probably be the most familiar to people, which was used in the Pirates of the Caribbean, of course, used that.
That's the one I know, yeah.
But my favourite book of his is one called The Anubis Gates, which was released in 1983. The main character is an English professor, and he falls in with this eccentric billionaire who has somehow stumbled on the secret of time travel. And this billionaire is sort of setting up a little jaunt back to the 19th century to attend a lecture by Coleridge. So they all go back and attend this lecture by Coleridge. And then, of course, things start to go wrong. And as it unfolds, it turns out there's a plot by Egyptian magicians going on to overthrow the British Empire. And we get into all sorts of shenanigans. There's mummies, there's werewolves, there's all sorts of stuff going on.
Nice.
But there's two really striking things about this that really stuck with me. One is the ending, the twist at the end, which I'm not going to reveal because it is such a great twist. But the other one is this lovely scene where the main character is strolling around Victorian London and he hears someone whistling Yesterday by the Beatles. So this sudden sense that, shit, what's the implication of that? There's other time travelers, you know. And of course, then if you go on YouTube or, on social media, there's all these pictures of supposed time travelers, isn't there? There's a guy in 1940 with a mobile phone and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you've got, the thing is, right, I am a skeptic when it comes to them kind of things. One of the reasons I'm a skeptic, if there was a guy with a mobile phone in the 1940s, who the hell was he calling? There's no mobile phone network.
I can't get a chuffing signal in 2025.
I know, right?
I'm on the phone to my mate, and I go 100 yards down the road, and the signal drops. So yeah.
Yeah, you go into pretty much any country pub in Britain, and you won't have a signal. Not a single bar.
Perhaps he was taking selfies of himself with Eisenhower or something. I don't know, but I think it's that famous one. I think it's the hipster, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a guy. He's dressed. He's got like Ray-Ban shades on, and he looks like a sort of surfer dude from the sort of early '60s or something. But people were saying, yeah, but like beatniks have been around since the 1940s.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Anyway, if you've got any good examples of that, dear listener, do let us know. I always like to see these things, bullshit or not. They're always fun to look at. And let us know your favourite time travel film or story as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring up, actually, just because you were talking about it, a film, it was the early 2000s, called The Butterfly Effect. I thought that was actually a really well done time travel thing. It's basically the grandfather paradox and kind of thing. So the guy can change the future, and because something crap happens, so he changes it, but it makes it more crap. So he changes it again, and it makes it even more crap. And the only way to deal with it is basically to kill himself. It's a really, really quite a grim film, which is surprising because it stars Ashton Kutcher. But it's not a comedy at all. It's quite a grim film. I really enjoyed it. I've not seen it since I saw it at the cinema, so it might be a lot of crap now. But I really enjoyed it at the time. So yeah.
And that idea, I mean, that goes across all the genres of film as well, isn't it? I've obviously got things like Terminator, which you call like sort of sci-fi drama film. But what was that film, Sliding Doors? I think, wasn't it? Where
oh yeah, Sliding Doors.
You take one route in life, but then if you'd have taken another, you get these two very different outcomes.
Well, that's the many worlds theory, isn't it? That's the many worlds theory of that kind of thing.
Everything exists and has happened in an infinite number of worlds, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, the obvious thing, because you mentioned Star Trek, I'll mention it. Doctor Who. There you go. It's full of it. The whole thing's about time travel. So have at it. Yeah.
So possibly in another reality, Tim Mendes is Prime Minister of the UK.
That'd be hilarious, wouldn't it? Could you imagine? Could you imagine?
Downing Street has been repainted black on the inside as well as the outside.
Oh, that'd be brilliant.
There wouldn't be a cat, there'd be a raven. Yeah, I can picture it.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, yeah. And none of these, the motorcades, none of these stretch limos. It'd be a hearse, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes. The new national anthem would be Bela Lugosi's Dead. Which, let's face it, would be
awesome.
A huge improvement.
Oh, can you imagine at the Olympics that bass line kicks in? That bong, bong, bong.
Bela Lugosi's Shed.
Yes.
Oh dear, the mind boggles, and it does boggle. If you sit down and think about that stuff too much, as you always say, you'd get a nosebleed, wouldn't you? But
yes, indeed.
It is fascinating to start speculating on the nature of time, something so abstract, yet something that has a profound effect on all of us.
It's like Linda, my partner, struggles with time travel. Paradoxes do her head in. I remember once, it was one of those, it's like that meme, you got that bloke, the drunk bloke, explaining to a very bored girlfriend about something. It was one of them. Yeah. I want like a 20-minute drunken ramble about the grandfather paradox. And at the end of it, just went, will you shut up and go to bed?
Right, well, time waits for no man or woman or Shoggoth or Migo even. Well, I don't know about Shoggoths. They're quite long-lived, aren't they? So we shall draw things to a close. However, before we do go, we do have a couple of items of mail to read out. We have a message in from our Auburn correspondent, Niels Hedgelin. And Niels writes, from the stories you've read, do you remember any of Smith's main characters that weren't human? I know some humans that change into other things, and some might be dead humans, but I can't think of any that start out as non-human. I'm reading Lynn Carter's pastiches of Smith, and the second and third stories have non-human characters, which I thought was an unusual choice if none of Smith's characters were non-human. No, I can't think of any that spring to mind. As you say, we've had people change, and we've certainly had a couple of dead ends.
No.
We kind of get the alien perspective in some of the conversations with non-humans.
Yeah, but I can't think of like a non-human protagonist or main character. No, off the top of my head, no, not so far anyway.
No, maybe in some of the stories to come. But this time with something else we were talking about on the Innsmouth Book Club about writing the story from, in air quotes, the monster's perspective, but then how do you write things from the perspective of a deep one or a Shoggoth or something like that?
Well, I have written a story from the perspective of a great old one, but I've recently revisited that and turned it saucy as for that anthology I'm doing with Zoe, which is going to be called Beyond Desire, and yeah, so that was really interesting, trying to put your head into the into the non-Euclidean cranium of a squiggly tentacle monster from the dawn of time.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Got no point of reference. It's really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I've done ghouls, but ghouls are kind of very humanish, and their their motivations are usually pretty simple to understand, right? Find something, eat it, whatever else ghouls get up to.
Yeah.
Yeah, something totally alien. That's quite a challenge, I should think.
Yeah, definitely. Now, on the subject of Lynn Carter's posthumous collaborations with Smith, we received an email from Nils, which was, the title of the email was For Tim. And then the first one goes, reading a Lynn Carter story based on an uncompleted Clark Ashton Smith fragment. And he sent me a screenshot, which was highlighted. And highlighted was the word pornox, which is apparently a double star in the constellation of Manticora. And yes, it gets even worse than pornox. Following up, but wait, there's more. Loathsome and tumescent fungi whose swollen and phallic hooded crests soared, swaying to every side. So, giant mushroom cocks.
Oh, that was so good. Yeah, I did like the description of them having spongy bowls as well.
Indeed. So I responded, brilliant. What's the story called? I may have it somewhere. I have a bunch of Lynn Carter's posthumous collaborations in Chaosium's Book of Ibon. Niels replied, yes, it's in there. It's the first story, The Double Tower. Apparently he's doing a series on Carter's pastiches. Again, I responded with, I read them ages back, but I don't really remember them. I'll have to dig them out at some point. Maybe a Strange Shadows bonus episode about the Carter collaborations should be in order.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Niels. Yeah, we'll get you on for those. That'll be great. We'll have a chat about those. Yeah. I did have that Book of Ibon collection, so I've probably read it, but again, probably many years ago. So I shall dust off my musty tomes.
Indeed. Yeah.
And we have one more message just to finish. This was on our Patreon page from A.T. Johnston, who writes about our bonus episode, The Dark Chateau, which was a reading of some of Smith's poems, including The Dark Chateau. And A.T. writes, brilliant, lads. Yes, I think you are.
I like, you had to get dramatic. I like that. I like it.
Well, I feel that's how he wrote it. I mean, EI is in capital letters and there's lots of exclamation marks. So I hope I did that justice, AT. Thank you for that.
Indeed. Yeah. It's not the sort of phrase you could say non-dramatically, is it?
Not really.
Yes, I don't quite. No, it doesn't really work.
So thanks for that, chaps. Always great to hear from our listeners. So yeah, do send in any of your comments, questions and suggestions via the usual channels. That's our Patreon page, Facebook page, YouTube, or, you could send something through the mists of time and perhaps we'll read it in a far-flung future on Pluto. Who knows? And of course, if you'd like to join our patrons in supporting the show, do check out the Patreon site. You'll get access to all our bonus content, both for Strange Shadows and for the Innsmouth Book Club. and a quarterly copy of Innsmouth News, as well, of course, as free entry to the Innsmouth Literary Festival, which is going to be taking place on the 27th of September this year. We're back at the King in Yellow's house in sunny Bedford, and we're going to keep things pretty much the same, but there are going to be one or two tweaks. We're hoping to add a couple of extra events in on the Friday night and on the Sunday as well. So do keep an ear, an eye, or other appendage out for news of that. That's it for this episode then. Thanks very much for joining us. What are we looking at next time, sir?
Next time, we're back into science fiction territory. We're looking... I'm going to make a mess of this because I struggle to say this word. We're looking at the supernumerary corpse. Hey, I did it.
That's very well done. An intriguing title. Excellent. Hope you can join us for that, folks. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Whiten.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.